Hello, my dear friends. I am Dr. Waseem I Khan, Assistant Professor, Shri Shivaji Law College, Parvani, Maharashtra, India. So today's point of discussion will be a second important defense for the law of tort, that is a act of God, with measure. So by taking this particular defense, person and defendant can avoid his liability. So under what circumstances this particular defense will be available and what are the essentials of this particular defense with case law, we will discuss in this particular lecture. So let's start the topic. So act of God is the second defense available for the tort. So what is mean by act of God, we will discuss in this lecture. It literally means an act of nature independent of human intervention. So act of God is purely called act of nature independent of human intervention. If there is no human intervention, it is purely a natural act that is supposed to be known as a act of God. If there is a human intervention, it will not be called as act of God. So which cannot be foreseen by any amount of human ability and skill. Any act which cannot be foreseen by applying any kind of human ability or by applying any kind of human skill, that is known as the act of God. We cannot forecast anything, but we cannot foresee anything by applying any kind of skill. That act is supposed to be known as act of God. If sin cannot be prevented by any means, care and skill. Sometimes there may be a possibility that any act can be foreseen, but if that particular act cannot be prevented by applying any means, by applying any care, by applying any skill, then it will be called as act of God. So natural act is there. There is no intervention of human agencies. Sometimes it cannot be foreseen. That particular act cannot be foreseen by applying any skill. Sometimes it may be foreseen, but it cannot be prevented by any means or care and skill. That act is known as act of God. The example of act of God is that earthquake. So it is purely an example of act of God because we cannot foreseen an earthquake, and sometimes there may be by applying a certain skill we can foreseen, but we cannot prevent that particular act. If we foreseen the earthquake but we cannot prevent, that's why it is an act of God. Then lightning is an act of God. It is an example of act of God. Then heavy rainfall is an act of God. So why it is an act of God? Sometimes we can foresee that there may be a possibility of heavy rainfall. If there is a weather forecast, okay, there may be a possibility of heavy rainfall, but we cannot prevent that heavy rainfall by applying any skill, care and means. That's why it is an act of God. Another example of act of God is a flood. So flood, suppose due to the heavy rainfall there may be a possibility of flood, and that is an act of God. And under all these circumstances, if any person sustained any loss due to the act of God, then defendant will not be held responsible. And if a plaintiff filed a suit against the defendant is having a very right to take the defense of act of God. He will be entitled to take the defense of act of God. So there are certain essentials of act of God. The first one is there must be a working of natural force. Suppose if the defendant wants to take the defense of act of God, he must prove the first essential of act of God, that is a working of natural force. If there is a working of natural force, then only defendant will be entitled to take the defense of act of God, otherwise not. If there is no natural force, if there is an intervention of human agency, the defense of act of God will not be liable, will not be taken by the defendant. Second one is the occurrence must be extraordinary and not one which could be anticipated and reasonably guarded against. The second essential by applying which the defendant will be entitled to take the defense of act of God is that the occurrence, whatever it may be the occurrence, that occurrence must be extraordinary. Suppose if the rainfall is there, the rainfall must be extraordinary and not one which could be anticipated. It cannot be anticipated, and if it is anticipated, it cannot be reasonably guarded. So heavy rainfall is an example of extraordinary occurrence. Suppose if the weather forecast is there, the possibility of heavy rainfall is there, but we cannot prevent that particular heavy rainfall by applying any kind of skill. So these two essential must be proved by the defendant if you want to take the defense of act of God. Natural force must be there, and whatever it may be the occurrence, that is the natural occurrence, that must be extraordinary, which cannot be anticipated and which cannot be prevented by any person. So these are the two things which must be there. There is a one case relating to the defense of act of God, Nicholas versus Marshland. In this particular case, Nicholas versus Marshland, in this particular case, the defendant constructed an artificial lake, and due to the heavy rainfall at one night, the water overflows from the artificial lake which is constructed by the defendant, and due to the overflow of water, that water washed out the bridges of the plaintiff, and the plaintiff sustained a loss. Plaintiff filed a suit against the defendant who constructed artificial lake. But in this case, the defendant took the defense of act of God. So, if the defendant wants to take the defense of act of God, two essential must be proved. The first one is working of natural force. So, due to the heavy rainfall is definitely it is a working of natural force, and the second essential is that the occurrence must be extraordinary. So in this particular case, the occurrence was extraordinary. Heavy rainfall is an example of extraordinary occurrence, and due to the heavy rainfall only, the water overflows from the lake of the defendant, and due to the overflow of water, the plaintiff sustained a loss. So in this case, the defendant took the defense of act of God, and the court decided a case in favor of defendant. Gajaya Lakshmi versus Secretary PWD Madras. So in this case, the plaintiff electrocuted by falling off an overhead electric wire, and the reason of falling off electric wire was a heavy wind. Due to the storm, the electric wire fall on the plaintiff, and heavy wind and the storm is supposed to be known as a act of God. So plaintiff filed a suit against the defendant, that is the Secretary PWD Madras, and Secretary PWD Madras has taken the defense of act of God, because in this case also there was a natural force. Wind, storm is a natural force, and it is an extraordinary wind, due to which the electric wire fall on the head of the plaintiff, and plaintiff got electrocuted. So in this case, the defendant took the defense of act of God, and the court has decided the case in favor of defendant. So this is a particular defense of act of God which we have discussed. I hope you understand this topic. If you understand this topic, please subscribe my channel, hit the notification button, hit the like button, and share this video with your friends. Thank you very much.